Today I want to look at 6 different accidents that make the WTF list, but they are good things to add to do a hangar discussion. These are lessons learned. Stick with me on FlyWire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire I've got a laundry list of accidents to look at. We don't have to do a deep dive on any one of these actually to see the lessons that they have to teach us. A Stearman, 2 Cessna singles, a Cessna twin, and 2 Piper twins. That's our list for today. Let's begin with the Stearman. Okay, if you don't know it already, I'm a huge fan of the Stearman. Basically, mine's been in the family for closing on 50 years. My dad's airplane, I restored it just over 20 years ago, and I've been flying Stearman's, been in and around them for more than 30 years before that. It's a wonderful airplane that will bite you. And a couple of years ago, I did a video on a Stearman crash that happened when the pilot decided to take off on a public road after a parade. Needless to say, that whole thing went horribly wrong. So on this particular Stearman crashed into Keystone Lake near Tulsa, Oklahoma in the summer of 2022, so it was a couple of years ago. But it just hit the news. So apparently this was, this apparently was a ride flight for a female passenger, and the pilot reported the FAA and the NTSB that he'd experienced some sort of engine trouble during the flight, and while distracted by working that issue, he did not notice a set of power lines that crossed the water. He struck the power lines and the airplane crashed into the lake. He attempted to extricate his passenger to no avail and then swam free of the airplane before it sank. Essentially, that's the report, and the passenger survived and gave a statement to the NTSB investigator, and she said that the pilot strapped her in and did not tell her how to release the seatbelt. He didn't mention that. He then flew very low over the lake and stated at one point that this is where I like to do some water dancing. She also observed that the engine seemed to be running completely fine. According to her words, she noticed that they were at the level of the power lines, and immediately they saw them, and immediately thereafter they struck the lines. She reported she was stunned for about 5 seconds, and then while the airplane was in the water and starting to sink, the pilot was trying to pull her out of the seat by grabbing her shoulders and yelling at her to take off the seatbelt. She didn't know how to do that. When the airplane began sinking, water was up to her chest, she realized that she was going to drown if she didn't get the buckle undone. She struggled with it, and she remembers something in the neighborhood of 20 seconds, and then got it released and swam to the surface, so she was underwater. At the surface, she realized she couldn't swim with her heavy sweatpants on, and she was having trouble maintaining, above the water, so she started to take them off. At just that time, a fishing boat pulled up, and a woman jumped out of the boat and then helped her put her in the boat, and then the woman put the pilot in the boat as well. If you ask me, this woman doing the rescuing was a hero. She just jumped in the water and took care of it, took care of them. And apparently they were some of the witnesses that spoke about the crash. She said the pilot kept talking while they were on the ride there back to the shore. He kept talking about insurance and that the airplane cost $200,000, and told her he was going to say that it was engine trouble because his insurance wouldn't pay unless something like that. They were later separated at the hospital. To add to the mix, the witness, I believe that woman and her husband in the boat, reported seeing the airplane fly over the water about treetop level. 10 seconds prior impact, the engine sounded fine according to her. Didn't seem like there were any issues. And then the impact, and they jumped in the boat and went after him. Karma must be a thing, because the pilot was charged with making false statements and obstructing a government proceeding. He was convicted, and as far as I know, he has not been sentenced yet. For your information, the NTSB final report reflects the pilot's original statement with no correction except for the comment that the ADSB data corroborates the passenger's story. I think that's interesting that it was in there. The probable cause was the pilot's failure to maintain clearance from power lines during the intentional low-level maneuvering. What's the lesson here? Well, there's a couple really. One big one, of course, is it never pays to lie to investigators. Everyone has a cell phone for pictures and video these days. It's all over there. So the truth's going to come out at some point, and it's probably going to be embarrassing. And apparently for this pilot, it was good because he was convicted of that, of lying. So there's something to say for integrity after all. Oh, and why fly so low that the fish have to duck? This brings to mind a Stearman that crashed into a lake in North Carolina in the late 90s when I lived there. Don't remember the lake, but the pilot was reported to be doing this water dancing thing, and two were on board the airplane, but the airplane flipped over on its back and no one survived to tell the tale. It's just a huge waste. Next on the list is there are a couple of 150s, Cessna 150s. The first one looks like a stall with a half spin. Okay, this one is almost like the pilot planned it. Okay, just missed the ground by that much. Trouble is that it was in a mountain pass in Colorado, and the missed distance could probably be measured in inches. Turns out this was a rental airplane, and the erstwhile pilot was trying to clear the pass. Okay, my suggestion is don't fly it in a 150 to begin with, but if you must fly it through that mountain pass, do it on a nice calm day and climb to altitude tens of miles before the pass, before you even start to attempt the pass. Don't think you can climb and maintain any kind of airspeed at those density altitudes in a low-powered airplane like a Cessna 150. It just ain't happening. That it comes down to aeronautical decision-making. Judgment was not existent here. I should say congrats for being lucky, and maybe this is a cautionary tale, but I doubt the pilot has many lives left after this particular event. That was a close call. The next one was a Cessna 152. Okay, so it's got a different engine, 15 more horsepower. This student was doing his first solo and training for his pilot license, and it was in Canada. He was also very lucky, and he lived to tell the tale. I don't know where he stands in his training. It's not said. It was about a year or so ago, a little over a year ago, in Canada. The plan was to land after the IP was comfortable with the student's performance, and he was ready for solo, ready to go. After they passed this, they did 8 touch-and-go landings, and then the IP decided to set the fledgling pilot loose. They taxied back to the ramp, got permission from the chief pilot, and then the student took off on runway 29, and he landed. The intention was to land on 24. He took off on 29 and entered downwind for 24. Some traffic, so the tower ended up extending his downwind significantly before turning him back to the runway, and so he wasn't able to fly a normal pattern. The investigation determined that the 152 was diving at a very steep angle, probably at a much faster speed than normal. The antenna was blocked, so no ADS-B or radar data was collected during the final moments of the flight. But analysis of security video determined that the airplane hit the runway 550 feet from the approach threshold, nose wheel first. That's hard to do in a Cessna, unless you're fast. A very large bounce resulted in a second touchdown 350 feet further down the runway, where the airplane then veered hard left off the left side of the runway. The student pilot figured that wasn't a good thing because maybe he was heading towards the tower or something like that. And so he began to turn to the right and he initiated a go-around. Climbing to about 45 feet AGL, it then began a left turn over the runway at a very high pitch angle where it stalled and began a left spin. He was only 45 feet above the ground, so he didn't get very far, about a 180-degree turn, and impacted the grass nose first, nearly vertical. The examination of the airplane determined that the engine was producing power at the time of impact, likely full power. The flaps were also about 13 degrees deployed. Youch. Further review of the video footage showed that the left rudder was applied as the aircraft entered the left spin, and that is not the correct input. Lots of flat, wrong control inputs on this particular accident. I think this one looks an awful lot like a trim stall to begin with. Yes, the approach was rushed. Trying to land the Cessna on the nose wheel will only result in bad juju, yeah. And trying to go around in an underpowered Cessna with the flaps out will likely end in grief. Yeah, not good. There are a lot of lessons skipped or not learned well by this particular student prior to solo. Begs the question, was there a syllabus that they were actually following, and had it been covered? Proficiency, other things, yikes. To my mind, the primary lesson the student did not learn was how to properly execute a go-around. Okay? Apparently he was on a go-around, or trying it after that bounce and second landing, and he was trying to accelerate and go. But how do you stop a descent? How do you accelerate? How do you clean up? How do you get ahead of the trim, begin climbing, maintain aircraft control? All those things didn't really happen. In any airplane that has a large trim change between cruise speed and the configured landing speed, a more methodical approach to teaching and learning a go-around is not a minor task. You don't want to go full power, because then the airplane does a sharp pitch up. That's the classic trim stall. This may be, in my opinion, the only maneuver the ACS power on stall could address, but in my opinion, the recovery is much closer to the spiral divergence a couple of videos ago that I did. You're going to have to push on the yoke, not to unload the wing, but to prevent the uncontrolled pitch up and subsequent stall that you're going to experience. Okay, pushing forward with the departure with power on is how you enter a flat spin. Bottom line is, don't forget to fly the airplane. Here's another go around that went horribly wrong. This one was an Aerostar with a lot of bells and whistles on it. The accident pilot was planning on going to a fly-in about an hour-ish north of his home in Florida, and he went there and attempted a landing. In two different descriptions that the pilot gave of the event, he said he had decided to go around because he was too fast, or maybe because the crosswind was too great. It made him uncomfortable. This was classified as an incident, not an accident, so you're not going to find it in the accident database. The pilot owner said that he had already committed to a go-around before touching down and could not distinguish the sound of the scraping on the ground with all the noise of the go-around. He said he had retracted the flaps to a little early, and that caused the sag. I'm not calling balls and strikes here so much, but the video shows the flaps down during the ground skid and the subsequent takeoff. Also, to my ear, you can hear the engine spool up during the ground slide. I think this is likely a very high-stress situation, and humans don't do well, and their memory doesn't do well in those kind of situations. It's less than perfect. But there was some awareness that the pilot had heard, he knew what had happened. He had decided to fly back to his home airport because there was no maintenance. He did the flight with the gear down just in case. There was a recognition, that is a recognition of being on the ground and then flying off, and that is an issue. Completing a go-around and flying for an hour raises the risk level to extraordinary heights. This is in no way a good idea. If you land gear up, own it, ride it out. At least you and everyone with you is alive, and then you can sort the airplane out later. Embarrassing, perhaps, but not as bad as what happened in this incident. As I said before, there is always someone with a video around. Keep that in mind before doing anything dumb, different, or dangerous. The Cessna twin was a 414 accident that occurred at McKinney Airport just north of Dallas on 27 June 24, just last month as I filmed this. The preliminary report isn't out yet, and there are a lot of questions in the ADS-B record, but the ADS-B record is available. This airplane took off from TKI with 3 people on board late in the morning, ostensibly for a post-avionics maintenance test flight. The ADS-B record is sparse, but foreshadows a familiar situation. The airplane crashed inverted less than a mile or so from runway 18 at McKinney, reportedly with the landing gear still down. Following the ADS-B hits, the twin broke ground at 97 knots ground speed, and that was the fastest the airplane traveled during the 1 minute and 5 second flight. From that point on, the airplane traded airspeed for altitude, eventually climbing 225 feet to a height of 875 feet MSL. Pay attention to the left sidebar in the graphics here as they go by. In particular, read the information in the center part of that column so you can see what the climb rate is and what the altitude is, etc. Takeoff speed for the 414 is 98 knots. VMC is 79 knots. The intentional one-engine inoperative speed is 98 knots. The POH says that you should maintain 98 knots until 50 feet AGL, and at that point, accelerate to a one-engine inoperative best rate of climb speed of 108 knots. Use one-engine inoperative best angle of climb speed of 100 knots to clear obstacles, and then you go to best rate. That's in a nutshell what the POH says about it. And also we want to get the gear up, and that's definitely a big part of it. At 50 feet ground speed, at 50 feet the ground speed was 90 knots and decreasing. Just at the turn to the north, the airplane was at 800 feet or 150 feet in the air, doing 71 knots ground speed, and had started to pick up a descent rate. This was the last ADS-B hit before impact. The ground speed was well below VMC. The winds at the airport were east-northeast about 5 knots, and that puts the indicated speed very close to 65 knots. 71 knots, by the way, is the stall speed for the maximum landing weight configured for landing. And you're below red line. You're below that VMC line. It's beginning to look very much like an engine failure, possibly the left, before or shortly after takeoff. This is absolutely the worst case scenario for an engine failure in a light twin. Perhaps closing the throttles and staying on the runway and using maximum braking might have been a better choice. As a matter of fact, that is what the POH suggests in this kind of a situation. It's especially true if the engine failure happened before breaking ground. A situation like that in a light twin is one of those that you have to think about on the ground and just execute in the air when it happens. There isn't time to think and evaluate variables. Planning ahead means before starting engines, and so you know exactly what you're going to do, and you execute it in the air. Just execute. There isn't time to do anything else. Without speed, you have no control. Speed is life. With speed, physics works for you. Corollary, without speed, it doesn't. The next accident is a syndicate accident that happened a while ago. Someone sent this to me, so I think the lesson learned is pretty obvious, but it might be interesting for you nevertheless. The accident happened about 2 days before Christmas in 1991 in Florida. The private pilot and the pilot-rated passenger were going to practice simulator and instrument flight. That's what they were supposedly doing. They were going between Ocala and Winter Haven, Florida. Here's the mission. Witnesses to the accident reported that they observed the right wing fall off the airplane during a dive. The investigation revealed no mechanical or flight control anomalies. The right front seat was in the full aft reclined position, and both bodies were partially clothed. Neither body showed evidence that a seatbelt or shoulder harness was being worn at the time of impact. And the clothing did not exhibit any stress-related failures. Okay, so that's the situation. The probable cause was listed as the pilot in command's improper in-flight decision to divert her attention to other activities not related to the conduct of the flight. Okay, that's suitably vague, but probably actually right on. But contributing to the accident was exceeding the design limits of the airplane's loading, and that led to the wing failure. Okay, that part's pretty obvious. Take what you will from that one. ADM is lacking. Technique left a lot on the table. I'm not going to tell you to not join the club, but I am going to say that you must know the risks and you must mitigate them, or don't do it at all. This comes under the head. This one comes under the heading of dumb, different, and dangerous. What can I say? There you have it. 6 quick ones. All interesting accidents, some recent, some not. A lot of lessons to talk about in the hangar, so there you go. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.